It was Dante Bowe and Marianne J. George with Kid again. It is 17 minutes past 4 and it is Tuesday afternoon. That means it's time for Creation Ministries International. And this afternoon we have Michael Cook from New Zealand on the line. Good afternoon, Michael.
Good afternoon, Mick, and again, good afternoon to all our amazing listeners over there. So, yeah, it's great to be back again, a week on from last time. So, really looking forward to this afternoon's interesting session.
Yes, and look, thank you so much for coming back again. It was great. We had questions sent through on our text line last week. And by the way, if anybody does have any questions, please text them to us because I've received a voicemail message. We don't get the voicemails on this particular system. We just get the text messages. So please send your text message, SMS 0401 949 949. Now, Michael, we obviously we answer questions that get sent through to us from our listeners. We also talk about news that's popped up in the last week or so, and I found a couple of articles that I thought were quite interesting, particularly their headlines, and of course I've thrown them at you. One was in The Conversation, and the headline was, "If evolution is real, then why isn't it happening now?" An anthropologist explains that humans actually are still evolving. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Considering the headline almost sounds as though, oh no, the evolution bit's almost stopped. Can you shed a bit of light on this one for us, Michael?
Thanks, Nick. This is a really excellent question, and so thank you to whoever sent that one through. And so this is a perfect opportunity just to explain the fact that the word evolution is a very sort of slippery, fluid term. So we often say that someone asks you, do you believe in evolution, even if you're a biblical creationist and you don't, as such, don't say no directly. A good question to return with is, oh, what do you mean by evolution? Can you define what you mean by evolution? And this is a great article about where they've used the word evolution, which people in their minds think about pond scum to people over billions of years, or even hydrogen gas to humans. But so what we're looking at is supposedly huge amounts of change from simple to complex and more diverse over vast amounts of time, i.e. this huge increase of evolutionary progress. So this, that's one term of evolution. People believe, if you believe the evolutionary story, that there is no God and we just evolved. But this article is actually very good. It's actually written to curious kids, so it's aimed at younger readers, I guess. But they've actually asked, and they give you a number of examples in here. Well, humans are actually still evolving, and it gives you some examples. For example, skin color and darker skin in hotter climates where there's more UV and so on. How having the dark skin gives you better protection against UV, and if you have lighter skin in more areas where sunlight is not that strong, you'll have a better uptake of vitamin D and so on. So both have a health benefit. Therefore, natural selection drives change and gives you an advantage in different areas. So that sounds pretty cool, and that's a scientific fact. It's called natural selection. Mm-hmm. But the key thing is it's not the kind of change we see for this big-scale evolution.
Yeah, now, natural selection, isn't that in most cases, natural selection is where we actually lose information in our DNA?
Well, that's right. And that's exactly the word selection means you're selecting away from something that already exists. So natural selection is a process, and it can also happen with artificial breeding, as you have dog or plant breeders and so on will select the traits they want from the gene pool, I guess. And that's why they're so desperately hanging on to heritage kinds of fruit and seeds and animal kinds. They don't want to lose the biodiversity. So as you select for the ripest, the reddest strawberries or the most disease-resistant sweet corn, is you select for those traits, you actually lose other traits. So over time, you end up with a thinning out of the available genes, and that's exactly what we see in humans, in animals, and plants. And so natural selection just selects from existing information. It does not create anything. So they have to come up with a means that will actually create large amounts of new specific information. And natural selection does the opposite.
Yes. I've got a friend who works up on the mountain. He actually has a farm, and he's got some really old orange trees on the farm. They're sort of not part of anything he's currently cultivating, but the oranges, the old oranges, they don't look as good as the ones you'll see in the shop today. but they seem to taste so much better. But apparently they've selected the ones that look good on the outside to sell in the shops because, of course, they sell more of them. But they seem to have lost something when it comes to taste.
That's exactly right. And so, I mean, you just see so many cases where farmers will select a certain trait, and had a very interesting conversation at one of our CMI events I had at a church, and talking about natural selection. And this gentleman came up to me who was a deer farmer. In New Zealand, we have quite a few deer farms. And he said they basically go for three different traits. One is they want to have a good venison for the meat industry. Another one, they want good velvet for the medicine industry. And the other one, they want good antlers for the trophies and so on. And if you select for one, you lose the others. And they find often they get really good head of antlers, but overall the thing is less fit. And he said, what you've said makes so much sense, that you select one trait and you lose others.
Yeah, and that happens over and over. It's kind of sad in so many ways, but of course that's why we're trying to keep that diversity. And I think it's something we're slowly learning as the human race learning. We have to keep that diversity. But when it comes to our genes, we have lost so much over the years anyway. I mean, we read the Bible. People used to live for 1,000 years. We're nowhere near that now, and there's really no chance that we're ever going to go back to 1,000 years, is there?
No, that's right. I mean, again, if we look at the biblical, because the Bible is not a science book, but it does make several claims which have a scientific basis, and one of them is, of course, the whole thing about we all came from two original people supernaturally created a few thousand years ago, and then at the flood we had what they call a genetic bottleneck, where the gene pool for humans went down to just 8 people. So you have a huge loss of genetic diversity at that point. And yes, I think we believe that the genetic loss there was one of the gene, traits was longevity, long life. And of course we live in a different world now too. So yeah, we never go back to those long lifespans as we continue to decline. So that's a good point, Mick. Here we've lost so much, including longevity.
Yes. And another article that we had come through, it said we're evolving too slowly for the world we've built, according to science. It seems a little weird. It's an interesting headline. We're evolving too slowly. Is that because they can't see evolution happening?
Well, that's again, Richard Dawkins famously said when he was asked about why don't we see evolution happening today, and he said, well, because it happens too slowly for us to notice in our own lifespans. But I'll actually do a quick plug, because this is a brilliant topic. Both articles point towards the same thing. So for your listeners, of course, creation.com, which is our website, we have thousands of articles on there covering a huge range of topics. But natural selection and evolution is a major theme we have. So if you go to creation.com and just have a look, just search for natural selection, you'll find a whole list of articles covering, including the ones we're talking about, is what we see in the way of disease resistance or lactose tolerance, allowing us to digest milk products. Is this actually evolution? And we see these changes, what they actually have happened in the background, and we see, yes, it's normally a loss of function, but it does give you an advantage. And so it's a really good series of articles, very easy to read, covering all the topics. And both these articles are covered in our articles. So creation.com, and just look up natural selection in the search bar, and you'll find the Q&A for natural selection.
Yeah, okay. I'm actually looking at one of them right now, and it says natural selection is not the same thing as evolution.
Precisely. And another one really, really good in there is about the evolution train is coming, going. And that's a brilliant thing. It talks an analogy of a train leaving the station and heading out. And what evolutionists say is that, we see the train heading out slowly out of the station in our lifespan, and by the time it's gone around the corner, but if it ends up in your case, say from Sydney to Perth, it's going to take a while. So we assume that because it started to head in the right direction, so we think it's going to end up at the end point. But in actual fact, we find the train is going the wrong way for evolution. So the more time, it gets worse and worse. So it's a really good, easy to understand article about the change we see in biology. Natural selection is actually the wrong direction of change for evolution to ever happen.
Absolutely. You are on 94.9 this afternoon. We're speaking to Michael Cook from New Zealand. He's with Creation Ministries International. They do have their website, creation.com. But if you have any questions for Michael this afternoon, please send them through to our text line. It's 0401 949 949. We're going into a little break right now. We'll have Toby Mack and Terry Ann with a song called Hope Road. That was V Rose with Young Dangerous Heart here on 94.9. It is 21 minutes to 5. And we have Michael Cook from New Zealand Creation Ministries International, who's been speaking to us this afternoon, answering a question that was in the media. If evolution is real, then why isn't it happening now? An anthropologist explained that humans actually are still evolving. Well, we've talked about that. And then the other story that was in the media was we're evolving too slowly for the world we've built, according to science.
Yes, and that's a really good article. And actually, when we read it, it's a well written article, and it's talking about, it has the assumption that we were once Stone Age, cavemen and so on. But I think it raised some good ideas that our modern society, it talks about industrialization, the whole thing about extra pollutants and city noise and microplastics and artificial light and sedentary lifestyles and so on are all affecting our health. And I think that's absolutely to be expected. God's designed us with amazing resilience and so on, but so we think the modern life is really affecting our health, and that makes sense. So that's not evolution. And if we allow millions of years, will we evolve to adapt to that? I mean, there'll be changes, but I think it's just a clear case of a beautifully designed body that is really being stressed because of our modern lifestyle. So the article is very valid, but they drop the word evolution in again because it's the standard lens through which they view the world, that we're evolving or we're not evolving. It's just that word evolution again.
Yes, and so often we see it as being the DNA's breaking down because of all these things that we've created. And, we're not living as long. Same sort of thing with animals, isn't it?
It is. Well, generally, as we see, one of the things is a very well-known scientific fact called genetic entropy. In other words, entropy means decline, or things tend to go towards disorder. And even evolutionary scientists saying, why aren't we already extinct? Because we know that every generation we accumulate mutations in our genomes that get passed on to our children and our grandchildren. And natural selection helps to weed out the worst ones that would make you infertile or kill you. But overall, most damaged mutations break things, but not bad enough to kill you off. And so they accumulate, and it's like rust in your car. You start off a little scratch and a little ding here and there, a stone chip. You don't notice much year by year, but over time your whole car falls apart. And our genomes of all living things are going downhill. And so it's a major issue for biology, I think, believing, we've been around for millions of years, supposedly. Why are we not all extinct? Because every generation is more has declined genetically from the one before. Yeah.
Now, obviously, we keep seeing this over and over. The DNA breaking down. Has there been ever any proof of DNA actually growing, becoming better?
One of the things we caution people to say, if we never say that we say there were never any beneficial mutations, because mutations basically are copying mistakes in our DNA, and they almost invariably damage or take away or break things. But there can be times when you can still lose some genetic information, but it gives you an advantage. And one of the examples we like to use is like beetles on a windy island. Where if they fly, they often get blown into the sea and will drown. Yep. But if they have a mutation that causes wings not to form, then they have an advantage locally, and that the population will increasingly be wingless because they won't get blown away. So that's something breaking, but it gives you an advantage at that point.
Yes. Wow. Now, I also have a question in regards to the Bible talks about lions, and we know that the original cat, there was only one cat. Is that correct?
That's a really good point. We were talking in the break there, weren't we, Mick, about the whole thing that's important for people to understand about the difference between kinds, because the Bible talks about God created everything according to their kinds, and they reproduced after their kinds. And so one of the things that's a straw man argument saying that God created all the different species, for example, lions, tigers, pumas, cheetahs, domestic cats, during creation week. Well, that's actually not scripturally or scientifically true at all. It's easily debunked, and we definitely don't believe that. What it says that God created the original kind, so he would have created the cat kind, the cattle kind, the horse kind, the dog kind, and so on. Genetically rich, medium size, long fur, etc. So middle of the road genetically. And then over time, there was huge amounts of genetic potential in their genomes. And over time, God designed it knowing that we'd be in a fallen and changing world, and things can adapt and adjust to different environments as certain traits are selected. So yes, we expect that, and it's a biblically accurate thing to see change, but they never go outside their kind. So you're never going to have, one creature, one kind evolving into another. But we do see variation within the kind, and that absolutely affirms the biblical model of biology.
So when it comes to, whatever the original cat was, whether it was a lion or a saber-toothed tiger or whatever it might have been, nowadays we get little pussycats. So obviously a pussycat is the same kind, so a lot of the DNA would be the same, but it's lost a bunch of information and now only a pussycat. Could they ever evolve over time? Let's just imagine evolution really could happen. Could a pussycat become a lion again?
No, we've got time, mate, just to give you that quick dog example, because I can actually, this is a brilliant thing we use in our creation ministries sessions and so on, showing how natural selection and variation is not evolution, and it's using the example of dogs. Dogs are a brilliant example of massive change, and so if you look at the dogs, we have both domestic breeds and wild kinds, so you end up with poodles and chihuahuas and labradors and greyhounds and everything else, or huskies and dingoes and so on, different kinds of dogs. They all came from an original wolf-like ancestor a few thousand years ago, and that's basically standard understanding of that. So if you continue to select for largeness, you want a big dog for your guarding your sheep, you keep selecting for the largest of each puppy, litter of puppies, you'll end up with something like a Great Dane. So it shows you the original wolf-like ancestor with erect ears, medium length fur, long tail, medium size, had potential to be expressed into a Great Dane. And if you go the other way and you start selecting for small and cute, that's the trait I want, you don't worry about the others, you eventually end up with a Chihuahua. But that's the kicker. So if something killed off all the dogs in the world except for Chihuahuas, you're never able to go back to anything else. So like you say, the domestic cat can never go back to a lion-sized creature because it's lost the traits or the genetic information for largeness. And that's the thing. So we see change, huge change, but it's going the wrong way for evolution. And so dogs are a brilliant example of natural selection, artificial breeding, but a loss of information.
Yeah, that's kind of good, because my neighbour's got this little tiny dog that I find really irritating, and it'd be horrible to sort of imagine that as a really big dog. I'm glad it's not going to go
Actually,
back.
One of the very quick pointers that people don't realise again that a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are actually the same species. They don't try this at home, people, but you could potentially breed a Chihuahua and a Great Dane together. They are the same species. It would obviously go very badly wrong, especially if Mum was the Chihuahua. But if you dug up a fossil of a Great Dane and a fossil of a Chihuahua, would you ever believe they were the same species, let alone the same kind even? Mm-hmm. So it shows you the huge variety you can get in creatures, again, coming from this biblical idea of God creating the kinds with genetic richness perfect at creation, and over time designing them to diversify into a changing world. But we see this downhill decline, all of creation groans because of the fall.
Yeah. It makes it easier to understand, Noah's Ark and the animals when you realise it was two of each, species pretty much, each kind rather. And there was lots of species, right. Is that correct? Lots of species, but only two of each no, lots of kinds.
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So, that's right, which massively reduces the number of animals that had to be on the ark. You're only talking a few thousand animals from each kind. So there would have been representative kinds that God would have brought, selected young, healthy ones that he would have brought to Noah, because God brought them to Noah that he didn't have to catch them. But yes, there would have been a representative of each kind with all the genetic potential to diversify after the flood as the world was repopulated into the species we see today.
Okay, got it. So they didn't have all the species, they just had the kinds.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense.
There would have been some speciation for sure, yeah, but God would have, yeah. And we've got some brilliant articles. Please have a look at our website again on the flood, the ark, the number of species, kinds and species. We've got heaps of articles, videos and so on about this topic. It's really well researched, well presented. It's a great place to really dig in deep and understand this big difference between natural selection and evolution.
Alrighty. Well, Michael Cook from Creation Ministries International in New Zealand, we thank you so much for another awesome week and look forward to the next time we'll be speaking with you.
Thanks so much, Mick, and again, all the best to you all. Just speak every blessing upon you as the rest of the year wraps up and you look into 2026, and keep up the great work, Mick, you and your team. I'm not sure if you still have your appeal going or if not, but support this station and really encourage them in their work, and be blessed. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. And yes, the appeal is definitely still going. And while we're on that point, I'd like to say a big thank you to Graham of San Remo for your donation.